With one of Nintendo's greatest release schedules of the decade kicking into gear, it's no surprise that games are coming out so quickly, left and right, that it's difficult to keep track of what you should even be focused on playing. Luigi's Mansion 3, Astral Chain, Ni no Kuni, Daemon X... forget that one. All of these fantastic titles coming out in such a short window of time is wild. Obviously, it's difficult for me to talk about every single one of them, so which one will it be? Which game do I think is so masterful in its design that it shall be remembered as a classic for years to come, which blew me away at first glance with its unique style of gameplay? Which game do I think will be the most important looking back? It's Untitled Goose Game. In my last video essay, I made the claim that 2019 has been a disappointing year for indie games, and explained how there weren't nearly as many quality titles as I would expect in one year. That claim is no longer relevant. Untitled Goose Game is not only one of the most charming games I have ever had the pleasure of playing through, it's some of the most enjoyment I've had with such a simple game in a long time. If I'm going to be completely honest, my most anticipated game at the beginning of this year, other than some stuff made by the Big N, it was Untitled Goose Game. I didn't have high expectations for it, I didn't expect it to be a very popular game at all, or even really fulfilling, but I was still looking forward to it for the idea of playing as a terrible goose alone. Little did I know, this beautiful combination of dumb fun and excellent comedy would develop beyond the concept and make for an outstanding experience. I'm not joking when I say that I consider it a masterpiece. Obviously, that statement may not seem to be the most rational way I could describe this game, but when you really get into it, it works so wonderfully that it shouldn't be denied just because of its wacky premise. So let's take a look at how this wonderful little game managed to win me over. As I said in the intro, the most important part of why this game is so great is how it manages to break past its comedic value. So that's where we're gonna start, by taking a look at the missions. Here's a quick rundown of how the game works. The goose is given a checklist of the evil deeds he is planning to carry out to disrupt the peace of the village. The activities found on the checklists are always genius considering the setting you find yourself terrorizing in each level, but they also manage to function as both rewarding and open-ended puzzles, resulting in hilariously set up scenes with the villagers. It becomes immediately apparent that this game really is a puzzle game, even within the first section. What separates this from most puzzle games I've played, though, is that it never quite feels like one. The solutions to the puzzles aren't very linear, typically having multiple approaches to reach the goal of destruction. For example, one of the first missions in the game is to get the groundskeeper wet. Due to how vague this request from the game is, there are so many opportunities right out of the gate to take advantage of. You can wait for him to walk around to the sprinklers for a stealthy move, make him run up into it as he's focused on something else, or you can just steal something and force him to step into the lake to get it. All of these are completely viable options that feel recognized by the developers. And you know what the reward is for completing these puzzles? Absolutely gorgeous humor. You know what motivates me to keep playing a game? Seeing something like this. There's not even anything in particular that I love about this game's comedy, which might be why it amazes me so much. It just should not be as funny as it is. There's not much going on at all. But somehow the stupid simplicity of it was able to make me burst out in laughter on multiple occasions. There's just so many dumb things this game tasks you with, and I was nodding in agreement the entire time. Break this vase? Okay. Have a picnic? Yes. Goose going shopping? What will he buy? It's incredible how quickly you fall into the role of the goose. Somehow the developers managed to create characters that I felt actively compelled to harass at every given opportunity, without any dialogue or actions motivating me to do so. Everything about the absolutely adorable design just kept me going, which brings me to the next section of this video. Untitled Goose Game has two qualities that, in my opinion, have been greatly overlooked by the majority of people who have covered this game. and I think should be acknowledged more often. The visuals of this game go for a mix of cel shading and minimalism, and the result is especially pleasing to the eyes. It fits the environments of the game and contributes to the juxtaposition of the tranquil village and the goose's actions so well. I mean, just look at it. It's so nice. I really want to steal something. The art style also perfectly complements the relatively basic character designs with unique features for every person, which often end up being interactive. For example, the shoes this guy's had, the glasses that this poor young child needs to be able to see. Each small detail seems to have functionality outside of just looks, which really adds to how immersive this game is. Yeah. I said this game is immersive. The other thing I wanted to talk about in this section was the soundtrack. If you can even consider it a soundtrack. Yet again, we're looking at an indie game that utilizes a dynamic soundtrack in beautiful ways. Just like I talked about with Ape-Out, there's no consistent songs per se that occur within the game. Instead, it relies on some little keyboard patterns that are scattered out across the game. These jazzy riffs are extremely pleasant, build tension to the chaos, and add extra punch to the comedic bits. The piano melodies are almost resemblant of Breath of the Wild in that they come in and out, only reaching a steady pace when something important begins. Except in Breath of the Wild, there are moments where the music doesn't pick up despite an important discovery, which is a pretty glaring issue that this game doesn't have due to its smaller scale design. Now, am I saying that this game is superior to Breath of the Wild? Yes. Untitled Goose Game is separated into 4 different levels that each vary in scale and difficulty. You've got the garden with the groundskeeper, truly a classic. You've got the shopping area with that really annoying woman in Call Me Carson. You've got the backyards of the neighbors, my personal favorite. And to finish it all off, you've got a nice and cozy pub. Each level follows a very similar progression with its missions. It starts off with some basic requirements that don't demand too much thought, builds up to some more complex puzzles or stealth bits, and then ends on a final point where you gather several items into one place, which is often more difficult than it sounds with everybody keeping a keen eye on you. Now, not all of these missions are necessary to finish the area, but you have to complete a fair amount of them before advancing. This progression system almost always works seamlessly, and I never felt like I was being forced into any specific decisions or routes. And even despite this freedom, each level managed to have a natural flow without any disruptions. Except for this one part in the pub where I kept getting pushed out by the buff guy at the entrance and had to wait for the delivery guy to come and pick up the box several times over and over again, and I want to die. But besides that, it did work well. By the way, the stealth parts of this game are legitimately intense. They pop up every now and then, only a few times a level, but they still might be my favorite part of the game. They always provide just a tad of extra variation from the regular puzzle format, and feature some of the most memorable moments. And when I say memorable, I really do mean it. Each unsuccessful attempt adds on pressure to the task at hand, and when you're so close to accomplishing something and just barely make it in on time, it is fantastically satisfying. Thus far, I feel like I haven't given enough attention to how diverse these areas are too, even though they have very similar elements. A good example of this is the dynamic of my favorite area, the backyards. When you first enter, you find yourself in this old man's yard, and having some experience with the game, you just kinda strut over there like,
what do you got to offer?
But quickly you'll find your way into the bordering woman's yard, and realize that the tasks for these two people depend on each other. All of these missions require interactions between the two sections of the levels, which not only spices the gameplay up, it presents reasoning to the player for these circumstances, and demonstrates the true environment that exists beyond the player's actions. This cohesion in level structure is part of what elevates Untitled Goose Game beyond just a novel concept, into a deservedly fleshed out experience. It continues to offer this great design throughout an entire playthrough, but does so in a refreshingly simplistic way. So yeah, the level design is pretty great. But enough praising the game. I do have one big issue with this game. This game lasts for about 2 hours. That is in at least some capacity ridiculous. With all the emphasis on freedom and player choice and basic design, I expected something that would last at least another hour. but as is, it's limited to 4 levels and a miniature final sequence. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adored this game's ending, but it really isn't enough to qualify as a level. It's just so bittersweet that this game is so well made, but so brief at the same time. What stings even more, though, is that you're given extra content at the end, which could have been dedicated to new areas entirely. I'm still impressed by what this title did have to offer, obviously, but it hurts me how apparent it is that it could have been a larger game. For a lot of people, this one issue might even be a deal breaker. If you don't find much worth in a 2-hour game, $15 may be asking too much for you. I should reiterate that I'm not in this crowd at all, but I think it's safe to say that puts me in the minority. This issue with indie games not being long enough is getting increasingly irritating with all these titles that have extraordinary ideas, great gameplay, but reach the credits just way too early. The post-game content these games offer in exchange are usually lackluster when compared to the benefit of just expanding the base game. I doubt that most developers are seriously concerned about the length of a game when enough praise is given for the core aspects of it, but it should be considered more often. It's never quite ruined a game for me, and trust me, this game is still spectacular, one of the most enjoyable games I've played all year, but the length is still a noteworthy problem. I do have high hopes for potential DLC in the future, given this game's popularity, and even just 1 or 2 extra levels could be incredibly beneficial for people seeking more from a game like this. I'd love to see something like that bring more attention to this gem, but only time will tell if this is brought to fruition. I may have gotten a bit sidetracked with my negative comments there at the end, but I feel like it's important to remind you how great Untitled Goose Game really is. It's a blast to play through the campaign and delivers joy at every possible opening. With this, House has made one of the most memorable indie games of the decade, with the charm and variety to prove it. Hopefully you understand why I consider this game a masterpiece now, and if you haven't already, I seriously suggest you purchase this title as soon as you can. And with that, I have talked about Untitled Goose Game for longer than I ever will again. I'm glad I couldn't make this video to discuss the beauty offered here, even if it took a bit of time. Since the day this video is coming out is fairly close to the end of October, I guess this could be considered my Halloween video? I mean, I guess I should have done something more thematic, you know? Maybe it wasn't the best option to go with a game about a goose tormenting. Yeah, I made the right choice.